Thanks for joining tonight. We're talking cut flowers. I am Cindy Haynes from Iowa State University Extension and Horticulture Extension. I've been here entirely too long sometimes, I think, but long enough to really see some changes in cut flower gardening. And I want you to have a cut flower garden as well. And hopefully this will kind of get you excited in thinking about growing your own cut flowers in your garden or your landscape. Here's a brief overview of the presentation today. We're going to talk a little bit about history because I have been here so long. We'll talk a little bit about the history of cut flowers in the US, maybe some trends and how things have shifted just in the past 20 or 30 years, how to grow your own bouquet. What are some of those specifics that you need to know, including some plants that you should try, some easy ones and maybe a few harder ones too. And then we'll end it with some resources, some books, maybe a couple of websites, some information that you can find some more information about growing cut flowers. I teach several courses here at ISU, and one of them is herbaceous ornamentals. So I have a lot of I guess a background, maybe some experience in growing some of these different cut flowers as well. But what I enjoy as well is knowing a little bit about the background of some of these cut flowers and why they're so important or why they're so popular. Cut flowers have been around a long time. They've been, there's evidence of cut flowers in Egyptian images. There's also evidence of cut flowers in literature from the 1500s. It's been something that we have done as gardeners for a long time. And you probably remember the story of tulips or tulip mania in the 1600s and how these were grown and so highly prized that they even kind of created their own economic bubble and inflation afterwards. The US has also been a part of cut flower production and part of that history since the 1700s. Before we were the US, when we were colonists, we were paid to grow certain plants, not necessarily as cut flowers, but as a dye. False indigo was one of those plants that we were paid to grow as a dye and sent back to England because they couldn't get access to the true indigo. Go forward a couple of hundred years when we had refrigerated transportation, the US was pretty big in cut flowers and growing different cut flowers. Colorado was really known for their carnations and growing the most beautiful carnations and roses because of that high elevation and intense light. And they were growing in greenhouses and protected locations. So we got intense colors and nice large flowers. So even in the Midwest or parts of the West, we were known for the quality of our cut flowers. Since then, in the 1950s and 60s, the US was pretty good at growing cut flowers at many different places across the US. Almost 80% of the cut flowers that were used were actually from the US, and we were a big exporter of cut flowers to other countries as well. We also had fewer restrictions at the time. We could move things around a little bit easier, but cut flowers as a whole generally move very quickly because there's no soil or roots attached, and so they tend to be very free of different insects and disease. This all changed a little bit in the 1960s, late 1960s, 1970s, when a PhD candidate wrote a master's thesis or a dissertation on the ideal qualities to growing cut flowers and the ideal locations in the world to growing cut flowers, and maybe the advantages of growing flowers in Colombia instead of the US. And because of that, we aren't really the best at growing cut flowers anymore. And there's some real advantages to growing those typical cut flowers like roses, carnations, mom's and baby's breath in other places. And so I'm going to ask you to type something into the chat real quick. So I'm going to pull this down so I can see. So what do you think what advantages to these countries like Colombia and Ecuador have over the US? Weather, climate, less frost, cheaper labor, longer growing season. Excellent, you're getting it. The sunlight, the intensity of the sunlight is hugely important here. Fewer regulations, right? No snowstorms. Yes, all of these things come into play. And because of it, we often see larger roses, better color on carnations, and sometimes year-round production in some of these locations. So we aren't necessarily the biggest growers anymore. And for a while there, we thought that maybe this was endangering our cut flower industry. Instead, I will tell you that it's kind of caused a shift in how we approach flowers. And I think it's a pretty good shift. So in the past 20 years, let me tell you a little bit about the cut flower industry. It's a huge global industry. The US is, it's popular in the US, but we're probably not one of the top consumers of cut flowers. There's many European countries that do a little bit better job of that than we do. But it's not, of course, a bad industry. It's also a good career to be in. And it's been something that's been important for quite a while. Some of these numbers are pre-COVID, so do keep that in mind. And sometimes because of COVID, this is shifting just a little bit. I think because of COVID, we see the value in cut flowers in our health and well-being. So I think some things are kind of maybe increasing because of COVID. And growing your own, that trend of gardening and doing more gardening and maybe even growing your own cut flowers is increasing as well. More recently, in the last 20 years, 80% of the cut flowers that come into the US are imported. They're not us growing our own, and they're used essentially for the same purposes. The other big problem with cut flowers and a lot of our food system as well is a lot of this is wasted at the country of origin, and it has become an issue throughout the horticulture industry in general because of this post-harvest waste or loss. The states that are good at cut flowers, that are still producing cut flowers, are the ones at the coast. These are the population centers for the most part. Hawaii and Florida are noted for their tropicals. The Pacific Northwest are noted for their bulbs, the daffodils and tulips as cut flowers. And then California can just grow about anything. Because of this shift in where we're getting cut flowers, we've developed what we call more niche markets in the US. These markets are smaller, more local, and they're kind of piggyback on that slow food movement where we want to kind of grow our own local foods and our local food systems. And so not long after the slow food movement came, there was a slow flower movement as well. So this is a way to promote locally grown flowers, American grown flowers, and we call these growers specialty cut flower growers because they're not growing the big roses, carnations, and mums anymore. They're also called farmer florists. That's a new term as well, or a fairly new term as well, because they also be part of that entertainment industry where they're not only growing the cut flowers, they're inviting you to workshops and to come to harvest in their beautiful fields, because who doesn't want to be in a whole field of flowers? There have been some real successes in this kind of niche marketing and using a different geography. And one of the surprises here is Alaskan peonies. Believe it or not, they found a niche, because peonies in the Midwest typically bloom late May, early June, sometime between mid-May and early June. That's why we call it a Memorial Day flower. But in parts of Alaska, this is a more than a month later, so usually late June, early July. And there's nowhere else in the US where they bloom that late. So they have the market all to themselves. They can grow beautiful peonies because they have long days at that particular time, and they can ship a very popular cut flower all over the world when very few people can actually grow it and get it to bloom at that particular time of the year. So it's kind of a nice way to think about cut flowers as a maybe place-based cut flowers. There are many farmer florists in Iowa. If you're not in Iowa, you probably have some farmer florists in your state as well. You just kind of have to look them up. You might even have to just do a Google search for them. All of these generally invite people to come and purchase bouquets. Most of these farmer florists are also selling at farmers markets, maybe even local florist shops or other kind of outlets as well. I did see, Jen, that Pepperhauer was kind of devastated last night. I saw that by the tornado, but I know them well enough to know that I think they're going to come back. So, and let's hope that they do come back.
I was going to add that, Cindy. I felt like we would be remiss not to talk about the tornadoes that ripped through here the other day, and that Pepperhauer was one of the places that was devastated. Yes, prayers for them. We're thinking of them. They're one of my places that I love to go down at the farmers market, and I have a few satchels of their lavender in my house right now because I'm a knitter. So I keep that with my knit goods to try and keep the moths away.
Yeah, no. And when you stop and think about it, some of the buildings or structures were really damaged, but those bulbs that were planted may not have been damaged. So there might be some things that actually come back. So they may have hopefully a few successes. And maybe we can try and help them out a little bit as well. So think about that, and think about these farmer florists as well, including Pepperhauer, and how we can kind of help them and keep them going. We definitely need to have them in our area. So one of the things to think about is growing your own. And there are ways that you can grow some of your own cut flowers. I mentioned the farmer florist as well before talking about growing your own, because sometimes it's hard in a home landscape to grow everything and to grow everything well. So maybe you go to Pepperhauer or some of the others and visit them for lavender or for dahlias or certain flowers that maybe don't grow as well for you as maybe others. So there's always a way to kind of incorporate both that farmer florist as well as what you can grow in your own garden. Awesome. Thank you, Lori. Living treasures is another one. Excellent. So what I'm going to talk about today, or what we're going to focus on today, are what you can grow, some of the site considerations that are really important to think of first. What are some of these management practices that you need to consider as well? Because cut flowers aren't necessarily a low maintenance crop. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the plants that you can grow too. And I'll ask for some input from you as well on those plant species as well. But let's start with site. Site is really important. Almost all cut flowers need quite a bit of sun. Producing a nice big bloom usually means that 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight is needed. That's generally best for most cut flowers. They also like a really fertile, organic, well-drained soil. If you don't have a good, fertile, well-drained soil, you can amend with compost or composted manure. I will say that cut flowers do require regular fertilization. So even if you're amending, you may have to fertilize once or twice during the growing season as well. Fertilization's a little tricky because you really want to make sure you get it right. So in establishing a cut flower bed or garden, maybe you do a soil test to make sure that if there's anything that in particular that you need, that you can add it at planting time. This is also the time to think about raised beds if you want to grow cut flowers in raised beds, especially if you have poorly drained soils. Just raising it a little bit is very effective because most cut flowers don't like soggy, wet, poorly drained soils. They tend to rot pretty quickly. So full sun, good, well-drained soils, and then access to water. I would like to say that most cut flowers are drought tolerant, but we're growing a crop that we really need the most beautiful, the most perfect of flowers. And in doing that, sometimes we need to add water. So make sure you have access to water so that it's you can water or irrigate as needed, especially during those dry summers. So Rita asked, how do you know if your soil is well drained? You can dig a little hole, you can fill that hole up and see how long it takes for it to drain. If it's taken more than an hour to drain out of there, it's probably fairly high clay content and probably time to consider amending or going up or raised beds with a more drained soil. Other things to think about is how you're going to design these plants. All of these plants have beautiful flowers. That's the great thing. But when we're thinking about putting flowers in our garden, do we want to be a little bit like a cut flower grower where we grow things in rows? Or are we going to intersperse these with shrubs and trees and other things that are already in our landscape? Ideally, once again, these are kind of in their own bed and we're mixing them for bloom time so that we have some things that bloom in the spring, some things that bloom in the summer, and some things that bloom in the fall. So think about this is from the spruce. It's kind of a nice design idea for a raised bed with perennials, perennials that are blooming from late spring with peonies all the way into fall with the sea holly and the sneezeweed. So there's always something there in bloom. Generally, with a cut flower garden, you'll read information on how a cottage garden style or design style works really well. And what I want you to remember in that is that there's often some sort of formal structure, a formal layout of beds and borders, and then very kind of informal plantings where there's drifts of different things that are constantly in bloom. So we don't have spring all at one end, then fall all at the other. So it always kind of looks good that way. Also consider with cut flowers, these plants tend to be a little taller because we want long stems that we can put in vases. So those stems sometimes are very fragile and can be knocked over by wind. So think about having some sort of windbreak or fence or backdrop to help protect these cut flowers. And because they're also young plants that are sometimes planted early in the spring or late spring and early summer, when rabbits and deer maybe don't have as much to eat, you also need to think about protection from animals as well. So some Common cultural practices or management of different cut flowers are also important, and you need to make a plan for managing or maintaining them really at the time of planting. So cut flowers don't always compete well for nutrients and resources and water. So we want to make sure that we do a good job of controlling weeds, and controlling weeds really at planting. So once the plants are up, once they're fairly well established, we want to mulch with something to kind of block out the light, help conserve moisture, and prevent any kind of weed competition. Cut flower growers or those farmer florists will use a plastic mulch or a weed mat. You can use simply just organic mulch, and it can be straw, it can be landscape mulch, wood chips. Usually an organic mulch about 2 inches is usually sufficient. Cut flowers will need irrigation, and sometimes I'll put a soaker hose underneath that mulch to make sure that I have access to irrigation when it's needed. Fertilization too is also important, and we talked about adding compost or composted manure to those beds and borders initially. A lot of our beds have annual flowers in them, so they might be tilled, so that makes it easy to add. You can also add this composted manure or compost on top or at the end of the season so it kind of settles in as well. That may not be enough fertilizer for some cut flowers like delphiniums or mums, so a slow release fertilizer in the spring can also be equally as important. With fertilizer, be careful. It's important in cut flowers, but high nitrogen fertilizers promote a lot of leafy growth and not enough flowers. So we got to find that right balance. The plants will tell you. If they're growing really well and they're not blooming well, then you might want to back off on the fertilizer just a little bit. And if they're blooming well and starting to look a little lanky, then maybe it's time to add a little bit more. Last of the cultural practices before we start talking about some plants is some things that cut flowers sometimes need. There are some cut flowers that will require pinching at planting or pinching in the spring. Mums are a great example of this. Sometimes pinching after establishment forces them to branch and produce more stems and more flowers. So it's a good idea for certain things to pinch. Generally, pinching is just the removal of the growing tip. You can do it sometimes with just a fingernail, so it's really soft wood that you're removing, or you can take a pair of scissors or some pruners to take care of that. Generally, pinching is something that's done early in the season, and it's usually for those things that bloom in summer and maybe into fall. Almost all cut flowers need some sort of staking or support. These are taller plants, so we're not growing the little dwarf snapdragons anymore. We're growing the 2-foot or 3-foot snapdragons. So we kind of make sure that we're growing them in netting like you saw in the picture before, or we're growing them in between wire frames or trellises of some sort to kind of provide that support so that we get a long, straight, strong stem. And then finally, deadheading is something that's important too. Deadheading, we think we don't need to do that because we're harvesting these as cut flowers, but you're never going to harvest everything that's in your garden because it's just too pretty, and you're going to leave some things out there in the garden. And so you need to come through occasionally, and on these dahlias or on those zinnias, you need to remove those spent blossoms before they even attempt to set seed, so that all of that energy goes back into the plant to produce more flowers for you. It's a great way to kind of clean up as well. So some commonly grown cut flowers, I'm going to talk about these in 4 different groups. Annuals and perennials are by far the preferred, and maybe some bulbs are by far the preferred cut flowers for most home landscapes. But I don't want you to forget about those woody plants too, because there's some great ones there too. Ideally, for the home cut flower garden, you have something in bloom from March or April all the way to frost, so that you can have a bouquet every couple of weeks or every week during the growing season. So there's always something that you can combine. So let's start with annuals. Annuals are great as cut flowers. Many of them work really well because they are often lots of cultivars, wide range of sizes and colors. They are great bloomers, usually from late spring, early summer, when you purchase them and plant them until frost. So many of them just bloom and bloom and bloom and bloom, which is what we're looking for in cut flowers. I will tell you that sometimes mixing different annuals is very beneficial. So think about some of those cooler season annuals like snapdragons, sweet peas and snapdragons for earlier in the spring, so that then other things can kind of take over in summer and into the fall. Sweet peas are one of my favorite cut flowers because you have so many different colors that you can use, and they're incredibly fragrant as well. But growing sweet peas in the garden means you have to grow them on some sort of trellis because they're a vining type plant. So make sure it's a fence, it's some sort of support, even if you're growing it in a container, so that you can have that kind of tumbling effect and harvest these really attractive, fragrant flowers. And yeah, Gina, sweet peas are kind of a spring bloomer. Sometimes they kind of disappear in the heat of the summer. They're often gone in my garden by State Fair, I'm sorry to say. So other things that aren't gone around State Fair time are those heat-loving daisies that you can grow and grow really well. If you can't, or if you're just starting with cut flowers, you can grow these. Zinnias and sunflowers are so easy and so rewarding to grow as a cut flower. With the zinnias, you get a whole host of different colors. Every color in the rainbow, except for blue, is in zinnias. And that lime green, those really dark burgundies, the pinkish orange, rusty colored ones are gorgeous as cut flowers. And they work really well and super easy to grow. When you're thinking zinnias, when you're thinking marigolds, when you're thinking any of these annual plants, once again, look for the descriptions to say that it's a cut flower type. So it's not a dwarf. You want one with longer stems. There's zinnias called cut and come again type zinnias, so that they're constantly in bloom and they produce at least a foot of a stem that you can use as a cut flower. Yes, zinnias are butterfly and pollinator magnets, so they're great to have, and they really have very few insect problems. There's some disease problems with zinnias, so make sure you plant them in sunny locations and give them plenty of space in between plants, because powdery mildew is a disease problem that some zinnias are known for. Yeah, so keep that in mind. Another very popular cut flower is sunflower. They're fantastic too. There are a whole host of cut flower type sunflowers that are even pollenless. If you have problems with pollen or have problems with pollen stains, so there's pollenless sunflowers as well. I will say with sunflowers, I like staggering a planting so that I have some kind of early, some more mid-season, some a little bit late. And I like the ones that are a little bit smaller. They're not the huge head sunflowers because those look really great in bouquets. Marigolds too, think larger ones as well. These cute little signet marigolds are great in smaller little vases and mason jars, but there are some large marigolds that really work well as a cut flower. Marilyn likes teddy bear sunflower. That's a good one. There's a lot of really good sunflowers out there. And I think someone also mentioned that all of these have issues with Japanese beetles. And that is one insect that is going to be a problem some years in cut flower gardens. And I hate to say it, but the best way to control this is just to remove them individually. And I have a 14-year-old, he sees if they can swim in a bottle of water, and usually they can't. So that's our control technique. There are lots of perennial cut flowers as well. Perennials come back year after year, so you don't have to plant them, which is nice, but they usually have a much shorter bloom period. So use perennials wisely in the landscape so that you have some that are blooming in spring, some that are blooming in summer, and some that are blooming in fall. That way your bouquets change because your flower palette changes as well. Some of the best cut flowers that you can have that are perennials are peonies. You can grow those beautiful peonies just like they do in Alaska. You harvest them when they're in bud and showing pretty good color, and then they'll continue to open actually for several days afterwards. Iris is another great spring bloomer as well. Also think about mums. There's all different types of mums that you can plant that you can grow as cut flowers. I like the ones that are just the typical daisy type mums that are kind of easy to grow and have for fall cut flowers. And I love them when they're in those kind of fall colors as well. Also, don't forget about things like ornamental grasses. Don't forget about those little things that don't necessarily mix well with other cut flowers like lily of the valley. It's another cut flower, but it has to have its own kind of own little vase because it's such a short cut flower. And then this is also where I get a lot of foliage for cut flowers as well. Ferns, hosta, coral bells are great at providing that leafy growth that you sometimes need to make a bouquet really stand out. Here's a few perennials that you should consider for cut flowers. Iris are one of them. You can have some iris now that rebloom. So there are reblooming iris, bearded iris that bloom in the spring and rebloom again in late summer and fall. So I love that when I have something that kind of gives me at least 2 seasons of interest. I also like that bearded iris come in every color. They're some of the best blues, some of the best greens, really dark colors as well as really pale pastel colors. So you get lots of options with bearded iris. You also have some summer blooms that are very popular cut flowers at florists like liatris. This is also called blazing star. It's a native in Iowa and a fantastic cut flower. Doesn't bloom all summer long, but when it does, it really adds a lot of interest to your bouquets. And then for fall, think about that perennial rudbeckia or an annual rudbeckia, as well as goldenrod. I know goldenrod doesn't sound like it would be a great cut flower, but it's a fantastic cut flower and is really very popular in Europe because it lasts so long. And it doesn't cause hay fever. So this is a great perennial to have in your garden. So I'm going to pause just for a second and ask for what other annuals and perennials you would include in your cut flower garden. Are there anything that I have missed as far as cut flowers? I'm going to get to alliums in just a minute. Cosmos is a great one. Shasta daisies. Celosia was on the list. Oh, Lisianthus I didn't talk about. Lisianthus is one of those annual cut flowers that's a lot of fun to have as a cut flower, but it takes a long time to grow. So this is the annual that you want to try when you're pretty good at growing cut flowers. We're going to talk about some of the bulbs in just a minute. Penstemons, Cleomes, Gara, good. I saw Bells of Ireland. All of these are options for cut flowers. So good job. Salvia is a fantastic one. And we're going to get to hydrangeas in a minute, Marilyn as well. Ooh, heliotrope. Thank you, Peg. That's a fantastic one. A really good one to grow as well. Sedum's a nice one too. So yes, and eucalyptus, passion flower could be grown as well, though not the best perennial in all of Iowa. Good, and poppy, good. You're coming up with a nice list. Excellent. So here we are with the bulbs list. You're looking at the bulb list right now. And this is one that you talked a little bit about as well. Ornamental onions, daffodils, tulips, lilies. These are fantastic cut flowers. And for the most part, all of those on the top are great perennials as well. So they work pretty well in our landscapes. Sometimes I'll replant tulips because I want some unusual ones as well, because I don't have as much luck at getting the tulips to come back year after year. But the daffodils, the lilies, the ornamental onions are very easy to grow in very widely different or diverse soils. So these grow pretty well and give you some nice, reliable blooms. Also think about some of those summer blooming bulbs as well, like dahlias, ranunculus, gladiolas, and even calla lilies. These don't overwinter as well in Iowa, so you have to have a strategy or a plan and either how to overwinter them or in purchasing new ones every spring. But nothing compares to a dahlia in the garden in late summer and early fall. Same with gladiolas and ranunculus and calla lilies. They are absolutely stunning, even with the extra effort that may be needed. Here's some things to consider. So these daffodils or narcissus are fantastic for early spring. You don't get as many colors in daffodils or flower colors in daffodils as you would with tulips, but I like them because they come back year after year. And I can have some early, mid, and late daffodils. So I have daffodils covered, or daffodils that I'm selecting from essentially almost the entire month of April. The one caveat with daffodils is they don't always play well with other flowers. Their sap is poisonous to people and animals, which means they're usually not bothered by things, but then it also kind of makes other flowers that are in the vase with them not last quite as long. So they tend to be best on their own, which is okay with me. Other things to consider for summer are different types of lilies. There are Asiatic lilies that bloom first, or Oriental lilies that bloom next and are incredibly fragrant. And then you even have some of the species lilies that bloom after that. So once again, in summer, you can get almost a month or more of blooms out of just looking at different types of lilies. Which is a great thing to have. And this is one called Forever Susan, which is incredibly striking in the garden. It's an interesting color combination. And then here are those dahlias that are so fantastic to have in the garden, that late summer, early fall garden. Dahlias can get big. They can be big flowers, big plants. So you have to have big plans on how to support them and maintain them and how to use them in different bouquets because they're fantastic. Yes, and Mandy, you're right. Lilies are toxic to kittens and cats. And surprise lilies are a great idea for a cut flower as well.
Hey Cindy,
Cool.
what was the name of that orange lily on that on the slide that you just went past?
Yeah, this one's called Forever Susan.
Okay, thank you.
It's Forever Susan, and I think it's an Asiatic lily or a hybrid Asiatic lily, and absolutely stunning. And there's lots of stunning lilies out there. Stargazer is a really popular cut flower oriental lily that's also equally as stunning in the garden, but more pink. So don't forget about woody plants. And some of you mentioned woody plants as well in your cut flower list. And you can't have a cut flower garden without having some roses in your garden. You don't have to have hybrid tea roses that they do so brilliantly in Ecuador. You can have some of the more old-fashioned roses. You can have some landscape roses that are disease resistant, so you don't have to take care and spray them with fungicides to keep them looking great. You can have climbing roses. You have lots of options in roses, and they all look good in bouquets. I love them because they're a little bit different. And sometimes those more old-fashioned roses or those single roses, they open fully and just look a little bit different in a bouquet. So think about roses. Also available in a wide range of colors and some different bloom times too. There are some that repeat bloom, some that bloom a lot in late spring, early summer, and some that might stagger and only have 1 or 2 times that they bloom as well. Hydrangeas and lilacs are also great things to consider and staples in most cut flower gardens. And then I also like to think about other things like forsythia, magnolia, and even crabapple as things that I can force into bloom in late winter or early spring, because these are beautiful flowers in my garden. And then I like bringing those in at times like now when I need them. And then finally, don't forget that winter is a season as well. And sometimes those evergreens as well as red twig dogwood can also make some beautiful bouquets even around Christmas. So here's some examples of a forced magnolia in bloom. This is a little tricky. You have to harvest it after it's fully gotten enough winter. So usually this is harvested sometime in February. You have to kind of keep it cool in a cool location for just a little bit longer as those buds start to swell. And then you bring it in when it starts to bloom and keep it cool, if at all possible, to have those blooms last for a week or more. But it's stunning. And you can do the same thing with crabapple and forsythia, and pussy willow is another one that sometimes we use a lot and force into bloom a little bit earlier. Hydrangeas are also fantastic as a cut flower. I like the pure white ones. They tend to be more reliable bloomers. The blue and pink ones, they often bloom on old wood or take a little longer to bloom on new wood, whereas generally the white ones, the snowball hydrangeas or the snowball viburnums are reliable bloomers year after year. And I love it when they kind of turn that greenish color as well, because that chartreuse kind of green color is so easy to use in bouquets. So things to remember, some of you are asking about woody plants and how to keep them fresh and from wilting. We'll talk about when you're harvesting cut flowers, what to do. We're coming up with that next, and I'm going to tell you, put it in water as soon as possible. And sometimes with woody stems, I'll cut the stem a couple of different ways to force more water into the stem as well. So that's something else I'll do as I'm kind of harvesting them and putting them in water. So, and they'll absorb that water pretty quickly. And with like a lot of cut flowers, you really need to make sure you're keeping those vases full of water, especially that first 24 to 48 hours, because they'll consume quite a bit. And then Kayla mentions that hydrangeas dry really well, and they do. They're fantastic and crafts as well. And a lot of the annuals on your list also dry well too. So think about looking at the back of your handout, that plant list. There are several different annuals that dry well as that hydrangea. So you can continue to have flowers and bouquets even into winter. There are some tricks and tips that I want to give you about harvesting and conditioning cut flowers or growing your own. Ideally, you harvest in the morning when things are very lush and they're looking pretty good. Late in the day, usually, especially if it's been a hot day, they tend to not refresh as easily. So also harvest them when they're in their best stage or right before their best stage of development. So right before peak flower for most flowers, and we generally harvest the perfect ones, believe it or not, because they have a tendency to last a little bit longer. You want to place them immediately in water. So when you're harvesting, go out with a bucket full of water, not a basket. Because this has been cut and you'll wander around for another 15 or 20 minutes. These flowers need to be in water as soon as possible. So I know it's not as pretty walking around with a 5-gallon bucket, but usually your flowers benefit from being cut and immediately placed into water. And then you want to cool them down. So most florists, farmer, florist, or growers will have a cooler. So they're cooling them down as quickly as possible. We don't have access to that, but your home is usually cooler than outside. So bring them in pretty quickly, get them out of a really sunny, hot location. And sometimes we just let them soak up a little bit of water for an hour or two before we actually start arranging them. Another thing I wanted to mention is, what do you add to the water when you put them into different vases or when you put them into that bucket of water? So what do you think you should add to that water? I'll have you type that one into the chat. I'm seeing things. I like it. Nothing. Okay. Your best thing that you can add, skip the aspirin, skip the pennies, skip the sugar, the vinegar, the bleach, skip the 7-Up, drink the wine and beer, don't put it in the water. It's the packet that comes from the florist or nothing. All right, so the packet is a Floralife type packet. It has something that helps keep the water clean and helps give some carbohydrate to the stems as they're kind of maintaining. We think of that as a sugar because a carbohydrate is like a sugar, but it's not the same thing as a sucrose that you would be adding. So skip the sugar. If you don't have a Floralife packet or one of those kind of floral preservatives, just change the water more frequently. Keep the water clean. Good, clean, fresh water and plenty of it is one of the best things you can have. Okay, so it's sometimes those floral preservatives are liquids, sometimes they're powder. Read them because they'll often tell you what dilution it should be at, and that's really what's best. Okay, so recutting stems is sometimes important. Usually I have to recut stems 2 or 3 days after I've arranged them, and that's a great time to change the water as well. And I do both of those processes as quickly as I can. Another trick in this conditioning process is stripping all of the leaves off of the lower stems. So there's no foliage, there's no leaves in the water to gunk anything up. So chlorinated water's fine. Just making sure you have good fresh water usually works and works pretty well. Your homegrown bouquets, you will notice that some things last a long time. Those mums generally last a long time. The roses are pretty good. And then others will be gone fairly quickly. A daylily is a great cut flower, but the flower only lasts for a day. So, and it's not going to last any longer no matter what you do. So some things are going to be temporary and others will last longer. So you should know what is in the packet, and you can ask on these different Floralife packets as well. So last thing, I think we're getting close to the end of the time for tonight. I want to leave you with some resources, some things that you can find more information about that make you think about cut flowers in a slightly different manner or a different perspective. And I love this picture because I love lilacs as cut flowers. So Deborah Prinzing has a number of books out there. She kind of started this perspective of the slow flower movement and also the 50-mile bouquet. So thinking about local flowers, just like we think about local foods, and the farmer florist idea has been kind of exploded out of some of this. She also has a wonderful podcast and has been doing this for a long time and has included a couple of Iowa farmer florists. So they're fun to listen to because they talk about growing, they talk about their perspectives, and I get lots of hints and tips in just listening to these different podcasts. There's also cut flower books by growers as well. The Floret Farm is a really popular one. This one's only been out a couple of years and pretty amazing photographs as well. So I love looking at that and some great ideas on arranging and harvesting and thinking about things. And yes, she does classes. All of these places do classes. And with COVID, a lot of them are doing online classes too. So it's fantastic. So think about some of these places as well. The book that kind of started it all is one by Alan Armitage. You may know the name. He is a big perennial and annual guru, plant guru. He and I think it was his graduate student at the time or his technician at the University of Georgia started this specialty cut flower book. And they looked at what to grow, how to preserve it, when was the best time to harvest it. So it's kind of become this Bible per se on what works and how it works and how to make it work a little bit better. So another good reference book if you're going to get into growing a lot of different cut flowers. It's been around since the 80s, so it's been around a little while, but still fantastic information. And then there's also an association of specialty cut flowers that also came out of that specialty cut book. They have some wonderful information on their website and a magazine that you can become a member of, even if you're not really a grower that's making money from it. So great information. And there's also the American grown cut flowers. This is kind of a certification program where they're finding different growers in different regions and helping them market themselves and be more connected to their kind of local communities in a nice network, and really started some fun things like a field to vase dinner. So wouldn't it be fun to have dinner in a cut flower field in the middle of summer, so surrounded by flowers? So these are just a few of those wonderful things that you, or resources that you can think about or consider. There's lots of others out there. Once you get into this, you'll find that there are plenty of other great resources as well. So last few minutes, what are some challenges you think you would have or have had in growing cut flowers, so that our more novice gardeners, we can talk a little bit about that and how to overcome some of those challenges. Heat and wind, space. I love it. We're always wanting to grow more spaces. Sometimes you have to prioritize what you're growing. Rabbits, deer, wind, powdery mildew, weeds, watering, sun, Japanese beetles. Yeah. Planting time, slugs. Slugs can be another one I didn't mention. Right? Someone asked the question, if you don't get all the alliums in the ground in the fall, can you still plant them now? Sometimes bulbs lose a lot over the winter. So if they're still firm and heavy, I would plant them in containers and hope that they come up. Otherwise, most daffodils, tulips, even alliums, if they're kind of shriveled up or discolored, they're probably no longer viable. Virginia, you're never too old. You can always have cut flowers, even if it means just having a few flowers in containers or a few perennials around your garden. So there's always ways to make it happen. I saw something on viruses. This is something to be aware of. Certain plants do have some virus issues. And these are not fixable. So usually a viral problem like a hosta virus X, it means the removal of the plant. So be careful of those and know what you're getting into. Okay, earwigs. Right, how soon do you start dahlias inside? That's a great question, and that's going to move us to the question side of things. Dahlias, those tubers can be started sometime in March, late March, and I usually start them about a month before I'm going to plant them outside, so at least I just have some nice kind of little stocky plants ready to go when I'm planting them outside in May.